श्रीलंका में आजकल क्या चल रहा है। अब आपने बहुत सारी न्यूज़ पढ़ी होंगी कि श्रीलंका में हालत खराब है, क्राइसिस है। श्रीलंका is right now facing the worst financial meltdown of all times. But why is that? Another episode of School of Thought. आप सब जानते हैं कि स्कूल ऑफ थॉट सीरीज में हम कुछ चीज़ें सिंप्लीफाई करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, चाहे वो मार्केट्स हो, चाहे वो जनरल चीज़ें हो, चाहे वो न्यूज़ हो। तो इस बार हम थोड़ा सा हट के बात करेंगे मार्केट्स, इन्वेस्टमेंट्स को लेके। उससे हट के थोड़ा सा समझने की कोशिश करते हैं कि श्रीलंका में आजकल क्या चल रहा है। अब आपने बहुत सारी न्यूज़ पढ़ी होंगी कि श्रीलंका में हालत खराब है, क्राइसिस है। Srilanka is right now facing the worst financial meltdown of all times. But why is that? क्यों? क्या pointers हैं जो इस country को, जो कि traditionally has been considered a rich country, its per capita income has been twice that of India. Its social indicators are better, if not the same, when we compare the state of Kerala. So, एक अच्छी खासी कंट्री को एक इकोनॉमिक मेल्टडाउन तक आने के लिए क्या क्या चीजें थी, क्या क्या पॉइंटर्स था। आज श्रीलंका में जो फॉरेन रिजर्व्स है वो है 1.9 बिलियन डॉलर्स ओनली एज अ कंट्री, आउट ऑफ विच 1.5 बिलियन डॉलर्स इज अ डेट विच इज गिवन बाय चाइना, which is unusable because of the conditions that China has imposed. So, out of the 1.9 billion dollars, only $50 million of reserves are left with Sri Lanka, which are usable. Inflation in Sri Lanka is about 39%. $1 is equivalent to 360 Sri Lankan rupee. 360. That's how much the currency has depreciated in Sri Lanka. Fitch has placed about 13 Lankan banks under a negative watch list. There is a $51 billion of debt that Sri Lanka has defaulted on. There is no food, there is no fuel, there is no medicine, there are regular blackouts, critical surgeries are not getting conducted. 500,000 Lankans have come below the poverty line because of this crisis. Sri Lankan problem is mainly divided into 4 parts: policy, politics, fate, and of course then there is China. Let's try to understand this. So what happened in 2019? Rajapaksa came into power. He was elected. Now during his election campaign, he said that he will, cut the tax rates of the country, and indeed he did that. But if the country cuts the tax rates, it gets less revenue. Where will the country earn from? So because of this, because the revenues went down, Sri Lanka was downgraded as a country by the world's rating agencies. Once downgraded, the foreign investors fled the country, because as we know, foreign investors invest in stable economies. The foreign portfolio investors invest in stable economies. So if your country's rating is downgraded, obviously the foreign investors will flee the country, which resulted in the dollar being outflown of the country. Now, another problem, I'll not say a problem, but if you see Sri Lanka is an import-driven economy. What that means is Sri Lanka imports more stuff than it exports. So it imports things like crude oil, edible oil, it imports sugar, it imports kerosene. So what happened in Sri Lanka is the traders, let's say the traders wanted to import edible oil. Now when the traders wanted to import this, let's take an example that the one USD was equivalent to about 160 to 100 to 160 Sri Lankan dollar. So they imported this, but by the time it came to honor the LC, the Sri Lankan rupee had already depreciated from 160 to let's say 250 Sri Lankan dollars. See, a letter of credit is generally of 180 days, which means you have time till 180 days to pay the amount to the person whom you are importing from, right? So let's say I imported today edible oil, $1 costed me 160 Sri Lankan rupees. Let's assume edible oil was for $1. Now, when the time came for me to pay that, $1 had already appreciated, or the Sri Lankan rupee had already depreciated to 360 or 300 or 250. So where I had to pay only 160 Sri Lankan rupees, today when I have to honor it, I have to pay back 250 or 300 or 360 Sri Lankan rupees. So it's a loss for me. So Sri Lankan government banned taking any risk cover against foreign currency. What that means is, as an importer, I will be at a loss. So what happened? People started hoarding all of these commodities. All of these commodities which became very expensive, people started hoarding it. And when when hoarding starts in the economy, it leads to high prices, and hence it led to high inflation in Sri Lanka. Once it led to high inflation, as we know from our previous videos of School of Thought on rate hikes and rate reductions, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka hiked its interest rates to control inflation. But the problem was, and generally in an economy, when the rates go high, foreign investors come to the economy to get the advantage of higher rates. But as you know, Sri Lanka was already downgraded to negative, and hence the investors stayed away. There was no inflow of US dollar, there was no inflow of foreign investors in Sri Lanka despite the rate hikes. Now Sri Lanka, in order to boost its foreign reserves, because it was losing out on foreign reserves, put some restriction on exporters as well. Exporters, let's say I'm exporting something from my country to outside, and I'm paid in US dollars. So Sri Lanka said that yes, you can export, but the proceeds that you get for that export, you cannot take it into your own account. You'll have to park it with the central bank. And when you want to use that money, you can take a permit from the central bank and use that money. That is a demotivation for the exporters. Imagine that was there in India before 1991. That you used to park the export proceeds in the RBI, and then when you had to use that, you could take a permit from RBI. That doesn't happen in modern world. Also, for importers, there was a ban on a lot of products. There was a ban on luxury products, on luxury goods. This was to save the outflow of dollar that was happening. There was a ban on chemical fertilizers, which is the key point of this video. I'll come to that later. Then fate also struck Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's tourism cost counts to about 13 to 14% of its GDP. In 2019, the tourists had stopped coming to Sri Lanka because of the Easter bombing already. And then in 2020, COVID hit, which reduced the tourism completely in Sri Lanka. To give you a number, in 2018, the number of Sri Lankan tourists was 2.3 million. And in 2020, the number reduced to only 173,000. In 2019, Sri Lankan tourism revenue was $7.5 billion, which was reduced to just $2.8 billion in 2021, which meant that the dollar which was coming in, which was building the foreign reserves of Sri Lanka, stopped coming drastically. So falling rupee, rising prices, high inflation and foreign reserves falling had the Sri Lankan economy crumbling. To give you numbers, a coconut in 2019 that costed 50 Sri Lankan rupee now costed 91 Sri Lankan rupee. Onions had gone up from 80 Sri Lankan rupee per kg to 158 Sri Lankan rupee per kg. The price of rice had increased by 93%, chicken by 55%. Lentils by 111%. Now let's talk about the nail in the coffin of an already crumbling Sri Lankan economy. In 2021, if I'm correct, The Rajapaksa government announced a ban on chemical fertilizers completely. This was a horrific blunder as a policy by the Sri Lankan government. It banned the use of chemical fertilizers. As a consequence to this, crops started falling. Tea exports, which constituted about 10% to Sri Lanka's GDP, fell by as much as 50%. Hence, $1.25 billion of exports per year were jeopardized. So, the inflow that you were getting as dollars stopped because of this decision by the Sri Lankan government. It jeopardized the food security of Sri Lanka. Cardamom and cinnamon production reduced. Sri Lanka supplies 85% of world's cinnamon. Pepper, rice production suffered. Rice production was so deeply suffered that in June 2021, Sri Lanka was forced to import rice, which has never happened, which has never not been heard of ever, that Sri Lanka is importing rice, which it used to export at a particular time. The problem was that Sri Lanka or the Sri Lankan government did not consult scientists or did not consult science before taking this step. According to experts in the European Union, organic farming is irrational. You have to use chemical fertilizers rationally with the use of organic fertilizers. You cannot overnight shift to organic fertilizers and expect that your country will come over that crisis. So science was never consulted in this. In fact, this decision was again going back to reduce imports, to reduce the outflow of US dollar. But it backfired. The country couldn't export. It didn't have adequate supply for its people. Sri Lanka also avoided closer ties with countries like India, countries like Bangladesh who could help them. They instead opted for China. They opted to get closer with China. They invested, they took debt from China, and the utilization of that debt was in infrastructure and military development, both of which Sri Lanka did not require. For example, let's take an example of Hambantota port. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now, if you look at the map of Sri Lanka on your screen, Hambantota is so close by to an already existing port, Colombo. There was no need to build the Hambantota port. It was never going to be profitable because you already have a port which is right next to Hambantota, and it's a huge port. It's a huge port that Sri Lanka has, Colombo. What was the use of that infrastructure? And the money which was given by China, very interesting facts. Generally, a country approaches bilateral or multilateral organizations like the World Bank, like the Asian Development Bank, right? Generally, the money that these organizations lend are at as low as 1% of interest. They are for longer durations, generally for more than 28 years. The money which was given by China as debt to Sri Lanka was at as high as 4%. 4%. And the tenure for that loan or for that debt was less than 10 years. So you're spending the money that you've got as debt on something which will never be profitable. You will never be able to generate income from it. You are paying high interest and you don't have time to repay the debt. That is what China caused in Sri Lanka. So let's summarize what happened in Sri Lanka. Revenues are the income of a country. Expenses are the expenditure that a country does. Tax cuts, the revenue goes down. Restriction on exporters, the revenue goes further down. Use of organic fertilizers, due to which your exports get a hit, revenue goes further down. Faith, tourism, Easter bombing, COVID, which reduce the tourism in a country, your revenue goes further down, your reserves go further down. Crude oil going up in the world, the imports become expensive, your expenses start rising. You take debt which is as high as 4%, your interest payment starts rising. Inflation, your expenses start rising. So what did Sri Lanka do? Sri Lanka's revenue, foreign reserves came plunging down due to the politics, due to the policies, due to fate, and its expenses went skyrocketed. That's a mismatch in the balance sheet, and a country could never come out of it. And hence, Sri Lanka is where it is today. I hope आपको मैं कुछ समझा पाया इस वीडियो से. आई होप मैंने कुछ पॉइंटर्स ऐसे दिए जिससे आपको समझ आया कि श्रीलंका में क्या चल रहा है और एक इकोनॉमी कैसे एक श्रीलंका के स्टेज पे आती है. अगर आपको अच्छी लग रही है हमारी वीडियोस तो प्लीज़ सब्सक्राइब करिए. अगर आप किसी भी टॉपिक को और सिंप्लीफाई करना चाहते हैं तो प्लीज़ हमारे कमेंट सेक्शन में या फिर हमें पर्सनली मैसेज करके बताएं कि आप किन वीडियोस पे, किन टॉपिक्स पे वीडियोस आप चाहते हैं कि हम बनाएं. थैंक यू सो मच. कीप सपोर्टिंग अस, कीप मोटिवेटिंग अस. लव यू. टेक केयर.